Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now I'm cutting back all the roses here in the cottage garden for two reasons. One, because having taken out the hedges and the espalier pears here, half of them are now revealed to be growing towards the sun. So what I'll do is cut them back hard to at least half their size, and then the regrowth will grow up nice and straight. The other reason is because I want to create space, and then probably next spring we can start replanting with a whole new palette of plants, as well as adding more roses to it. If you've got an old rose that's a bit unruly or growing in the wrong direction, don't be frightened to cut it back hard. You'll do no harm and probably a lot of good. Now, coming up on today's programme, Advolly and Adam visit Hever Castle to explore its history and the gardens that are planted on the grandest of scales.
You know how to show an old fella a good time, I tell you. I mean, every place you take me is incredible.
It's marvellous, isn't it?
It is.
We visit a kitchen garden in a very unusual location in the heart of Stockport.
I love being up here. We're situated on top of a car park. People are always surprised when they poke their head over and see that there's food growing.
Francis visits the gardens of the oldest Franciscan friary in Britain.
All of the planting was purposeful and useful, and that's very much still the case today.
And I shall be rejuvenating my stock of alpine plants. On a wet autumnal day, it may seem slightly counterintuitive to be planting alpines which really thrive in bright sunshine and good drainage. But by planting up a pot of alpines now, they'll get their roots established and they will grow much better next spring and summer when they will flower and look at their best. And of course, they're great if you've got a small garden, a balcony, or even a windowsill. Now, this is an alpine pan, and you can see it's shallower than a normal pot. You don't need a lot of depth. Alpines really love free draining conditions. So your compost must be gritty. 50% grit to 50% compost. You could use perlite, but grit is better. Now, to stop that gritty compost running out of the hole in the bottom, you need a crock. So we'll put a layer in the bottom, like that, and then start with the plants. Now, the first one is a veronica. This is a prostrate veronica. It's Veronica prostrata Spo Blue, and the prostrata gives a clue to its behaviour. It will spread. And this has got little blue flowers, and it's quite vigorous. Now, to go with that, I've got another blue, which is a campanula, and this is a name that I find really hard to remember, let alone pronounce. Campanula portensflagiana Reschholz variety. I'm going to position that like that, keeping them fairly well spaced. Now, this is a superb plant. It's a little sedum, Sedum spathulifolium blanco. It's got lovely glaucous foliage, topped with bright yellow flowers in early summer. So if I put that there, and on the other side, I've got a white flower. I'm going to put a little bit more under there. This is a dianthus. Now, we think of dianthus as pinks, but this is Dianthus albus. And this too will spread. And another blue flower in amongst it, which is a primula. It's Primula marginata caerulea, quite unlike the woodland variety that we get here. So we're filling the gaps. It looks minimal now, but these will grow and will fill the space allotted to them. And last, but by no means least, all alpines should be dressed with grit. Not only will this help with drainage, but it just seems right. This is their habitat. Gritty scree And this now should be watered, but don't leave it outside in the wet unless it's up on chocks. And ideally, you should put it somewhere cool under cover so it gets sunshine, but not rain. And then as soon as we get crisp, dry weather in February and March, then it can come outside and put it in a very sunny place, and you can enjoy those flowers right through into summer. Now, the whole point of alpines is to relish the fact that it's all in miniature. Everything is small and delicate and jewel-like. But Adam and Advolly have been to Hever Castle in Kent, and we're going from the miniature to the magnificent.
Hever Castle is surrounded by beautiful gardens and steeped in history. It was the childhood home of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII. But around the castle, there's almost 100 acres of formal Italian garden, a Tudor garden, and a classic pleasure garden, all the work of a very wealthy American.
You know how to show an old fella a good time, I tell you. I mean, every place you take me is incredible.
It's marvellous, isn't it? It was bought back in the early 1900s by a really rich American, William Waldorf Astor.
So not British.
But he loved England and he loved history, and he wanted to create a classic historic garden.
Wow. So you're in charge of the day.
I certainly am.
I get that. Where am I going?
Well, over there is an Italian garden which he created especially to house his statues. But there's some lovely modern elements, and I think you'll love it.
See that smile? I'm already excited. But where are you going then?
Well, over there is the Tudor garden, and that's where I'm heading.
I will see you later.
When Astor bought Hever in 1903, it was pretty dilapidated, but he had great vision and even more money. The family were initially fur traders in America, but his grandfather bought so much land around Manhattan and beyond, he became known as the landlord of New York. So Astor could build whatever he wanted. And he did. As the castle wasn't very big and he loved history, he started around the back, building an entire Tudor village using traditional methods and designs. No two walls are straight. Although this looks like a village, all the houses are interconnected with 100 rooms to house the estate office, the staff, and guests. He renovated the existing moat around the castle, but then turned a nearby mill stream into a second moat, and in honour of Anne Boleyn, created a traditional Tudor garden right next door. There are beds of highly scented herbs for cooking and masking medieval smells. A rose garden, and a lovely surprise. Just wait until you see this. It's a classic feature of Astor's passion. During a visit to the British Museum, Astor spotted a chess set that would have been used during the time of Henry VIII, so he asked for it to be replicated in topiary, as you do. Apparently, one nurseryman was in charge of the whole set, presumably with some large yew trees, and he managed to shape the pieces in just 3 years. Can you imagine the pressure? There's also an impressive maze which was created with 1,000 6-foot yews, but luckily his team were experts in handling big trees, because Astor had bigger plans. The River Eden ran alongside the castle and regularly flooded. So to help, Astor diverted the river all the way back and created this entire island from the spoils of this enormous lake. It's 38 acres, but took 800 men just 19 months to complete. There was so much spoil, a temporary railway was installed to create the island. And of course, every lake needs a viewpoint to admire it from. So he made this. Astor had been US ambassador in Italy in the late 1800s, and this is his version of the Trevi Fountain. And it didn't stop there. He loved statuary so much, he commissioned agents around the world to collect it for him. And to showcase his collection, he created an entire Italian garden. Apparently, while the gardens were being built, he stored his statues in a purpose-built barn. The workers called it the Idol House, as he regularly went in to admire them. Astor liked his statuary surrounded by a wide range of informal planting. So this is the Pompeian wall with lots of individual terraces. In the middle of the design, there's a sunken garden too, and along its borders sit some huge pots, which were alleged to have a famous origin. In theory, these enormous jars were used to store olive oil, and they came direct from the ruins of Pompeii, according to Astor's agent. Whatever the provenance, in just 4 years, Astor renovated a castle, built a garden, and surrounded himself with the things he loved in the heart of Kent. To me, he brought a delightful piece of Rome here to the Garden of England.
We will be returning to Hever Castle and joining Adam and Advolly later in the programme. Now, my pumpkins this year, I have to confess, have not been good. Pumpkins are one of those crops that can't get enough sunshine, can't get enough food and can't get enough water. Well, they had water this year and that was about it. They certainly didn't have enough sunshine. So I've got some, and now is the time to harvest them. This is a rather poor specimen of a variety called Marina di Chioggia. Now, it should be a lovely dusky bluey green and dimpled, and it's none of those things, but I'm going to harvest it anyway. And when you harvest squashes of any kind, the mistake is to cut it off across the stem there. Cut a T shape like that, so that will stop it rotting, because if you cut the neck, That's the first place it will rot. And with any squash, however big, however ripe or not ripe, handle it gently. In order to store, you don't want to bruise the skin at all. The reason why we're harvesting them now is because they are not hardy. Frost will damage them. And anyway, if you want a squash for Halloween, you're going to have to pick it. So we'll cut that like that, and like that, and like that. It's bigger, it's better than the last one, but not fully ripe. It may ripen yet. Well, that's 3 Marina di Chioggia, and I've got 3 butternut squashes. Butternut squashes, and there's a clue in the name, should be a rich yellow. And you can see there's green still on them, which means they're not ripe. If I put them under cover to get maximum light and some heat, they may yellow up, so it's worth doing. I'm going to cut that like that and that. So I've got a pair here. Well, that's this year's harvest, which is pathetic compared to last year. The truth is, it's not been a good year for pumpkins, but that, I think, has been true of all of us. So don't worry if your pumpkins and squashes haven't come through very well. It is down to the weather. The one thing I would say is next year, when you're planning where to grow them, give them the sunniest spot you possibly can. Right, I'll take these down to the greenhouse and store them there for a few weeks. Now, we're going to join Francis in Canterbury.
This isn't the Kent countryside, but the heart of its cathedral city, Canterbury. And it marks a historic spot, the original site of the very first Franciscan friary in Britain, a monastic settlement dating back to the medieval times. The friars were sent by St. Francis of Assisi to help the sick and the poor. This was their workspace and my favourite kind of garden, where all of the planting was purposeful and useful. And that's very much still the case today. The new friars on the block, a local husband and wife team, Robert and Tracy Jones, who were brought in to breathe new life into the Franciscan gardens by the charity that runs them. So, how did you come to be gardening here?
Robert and I had been gardening together for a little while, and we heard through a friend of a friend that this job was becoming available. So we came to have a look, absolutely fell in love with the place. I mean, it's just such a special atmosphere here. And they had a vision that they wanted to try and evoke the feeling of a monastic garden again, and to try and get it back to how it might have been when the friars were here.
It must be so fascinating researching this to kind of recreate that.
It's been a real learning curve.
Wow. So this is clearly the productive part of the garden.
Yes, yeah. So here what we're trying to do is recreate a monastic garden where basically everything would have been planted for a purpose. So everything here is useful in one way or another. So in this section we've got vegetables that would have been pot herbs, so things like the Welsh onions, we've got leeks. Parsley's quite interesting. They would have used the leaves, but actually they'd have also used the root, because that's root parsley.
Oh,
so
really?
It's got like a vegetable root.
Does it taste the same?
Yes, it's got a sort of a parsley flavour.
I didn't
And
know
then
that.
obviously we've got peas and lentils, which we're growing for the first time this year and have been amazing, really.
I've never grown these before. I didn't really think about them growing in this country.
No, they've grown amazingly well. Apparently they would have been a staple for the friars, a good protein source, and apparently they were brought over by the Romans. And
So
yeah,
we've grown them here for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
I've grown chickpeas and they look quite similar, that really beautiful, delicate foliage, but I've never tried these. You've got masses of beans to harvest.
Yeah. Over here we've got one of the plants that the friars would have used as a herbal remedy, as a cure. This is clary sage. It's absolutely spectacular at this time of year. It looks amazing. They would have used the seeds and made an infusion of the seeds as an eye wash. It's got antifungal and antibacterial properties. And in fact, there are records that say it used to be called clear eye.
I love it. I've grown it before and I didn't really expect it to do this, but I just had one single one. But en masse, especially
They
with the
do
leek
look,
flowers.
Yeah, they
It's
do look
beautiful.
amazing, don't they?
The essential oil smells really lovely.
This doesn't.
The flower's got a slightly suspect.
Yeah, we call it the sweaty plant.
Yes.
It does smell of BO.
Isn't it amazing?
Oh, it's worth it for the beauty, if not for the perfume.
It's a sensory experience,
Absolutely.
just not a good one.
This is larkspur, which is just amazing. It's got multi-purpose use, so they used to use the seeds mixed with water and they would wash the body with it, and it apparently kills lice and mites.
Really?
So in medieval times that would have been very welcome. But also
Yeah.
they would have eaten it as a laxative, and they would have used that to purge the body of illness or disease. But interestingly as well, the beautiful blue petals, if you grind them up with some alum, it makes a deep blue ink.
See, I never knew that, and I've grown larkspur, but have thought it's just an ornamental, and yet, you know, to learn that that's 3 uses, that's the fascination about this, isn't it? There's always more to learn.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's so easy to grow. The bees absolutely love it.
Yeah, look, it's covered.
Hyssop is a cleansing herb, but like everything else in this garden, it does more than one job.
You can brew it, and it's very good for catarrh and respiratory disorders. So it's quite cleansing.
Because it's not the most delicious herb, is it? When you try and eat it, it's quite bitter.
Yes, the tea doesn't taste that bitter, but you can put lemon with it just to fragrance it slightly as
Ooh,
well.
I'd love to try it.
Yeah,
Never
let's
tried
get
it as
some.
a tea. And I see you have yarrow growing around as well. Because
Yeah.
that's a traditional brewing.
That's right, they
herb,
used
right?
yarrow to flavour beer and ale before they used hops.
Yes. Yeah, well, lots of herbs. We used to use to make beer before we used hops, but obviously I know of yarrow as being a really good healing herb for things like bruises and cuts and things as well. So it's quite nice that it has that dual.
Yeah.
Maybe beer was good for you back in the day when it was made with yarrow.
Now, wouldn't that be a nice thought? I think that's plenty.
Great, let's go make a cup of tea.
Okay.
They are adopting some medieval methods. The friars' only access to water would have been taking it from the River Stour, and Robert's allowed to do the same within limits. Hello. That is a proper labour of love.
We used this water to obviously water this hedge, which will be planted in 2020, so it would survive. We watered it virtually on a daily basis, and we drew all the water from the river using cans. We both did it, one started one end, one the other. As you can see, the results here now are fantastic. The hedge is showing really lovely.
It looks beautiful, actually, and it's a lovely mixture of native species.
British natives, yeah.
So you have a real legacy here, don't you? Does it feel like quite a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, looking after this space?
800 years of gardening, for want of a better word, you know, that's really what it is. You can imagine where we're standing here, you know, in the middle of the city. The high street is just yards away from us, and yet we have this amazing abundance of, you know, wild grasses, wildflowers, you know, so close to a city. And really, in the main, it's not dissimilar to what it would have been, or could have been back in the day.
8 centuries on, the gardeners aren't friars, but Robert, Tracy and their team are nurturing this special space and enjoying sharing it.
Well, this looks rather lovely. You are open to the public,
Yes.
so people are coming in here all the time.
Yeah.
What's your hope that people will get when they come into this space?
The thing that people say to us is 3 things. They say it's peaceful, the tranquility, and that it's inspiring.
Yeah, totally. Well, should we try it? Ooh, ooh, that's nice. It's kind of tangy.
It's herbal but refreshing.
Very nice, very relaxing. Not a bad spot to drink it in either.
We're very lucky. We're very lucky.
Whenever I personally visit or see something like that, I'm always so impressed by the range of herbs that were grown in those monastic gardens. Now, this fern, which is Dryopteris felix mass, and it is a good idea to divide them occasionally. A, it rejuvenates them, and much more importantly, it gives you a fresh stock of plants for free, and now is the best time to do it. So take a decent-sized plant that you can see has got a number of heads, and dig up the whole thing. Now, obviously, I want to get as much of the root as possible. Right, I will take this to a table and then we can dissect it. Now, what I want to do is get in there, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 crowns in there, so possibly 9 plants from this one. So what I want to do is separate them. They're very woody in the middle. I may have to use a saw. So let's get in there. That's better. There we go. So there we have 1 crown. I'm going to cut off the fronds now. So you're just taking strain off the roots. Now, Dryopteris is very happy in dry conditions, so it does need good drainage. I've used grit and a bit of leaf mould. Right, that's absolutely fine. I need to water that, and it doesn't need any protection from the weather, except from being waterlogged. And next spring, when you see the green knuckles of the as yet unfurled fronds appearing, that's the time to plant it out. And the roots should have filled the pot, and you can plant it in almost complete shade, and it'll be fine, and you'll have a decent-sized fern next year. Right, that's 1 done. 8 more to go. And still to come on today's programme. Adam takes us round the magnificent gardens of Hever Castle.
You could lose a serious amount of time in this garden, just enjoying the shapes and the forms. The whole thing just feels like it's been sculpted.
Nick meets a nurseryman who grows one of his favourite autumn plants.
These demonstrate some of the best of your spray chrysanthemums. And this is a particular favourite of yours, right?
It is. It's a variety called Chatsworth.
It's a fabulous colour. People sort of forget these are just good herbaceous plants.
But first, we're going to visit a kitchen garden in the sky.
I love being up here. We're situated on top of a car park. People are always surprised when they poke their head over and see that there's food growing. We're growing all sorts of things from common herbs to exotic herbs, berries, fruits, salad and squash. My name's Sam Buckley. I'm the chef owner of the restaurant here in Stockport. We're here at the Landing, which is a kitchen garden that supplies our restaurant to add some interesting flavours to our food. These are really cool. These cucamelons are a sour hit. I think we're going to put these in a jar and pickle them and use them in autumn. So not everything gets used straight away, we preserve things. About a year in, we got a head grower called Nick Harlow. He's just such a lovely guy to have around.
My name's Nick. I'm the grower here at the Landing in Stockport. I'm outdoors all day. I'm surrounded by nature. It's quite a unique environment, but yeah, I'm able to grow vegetables, all grown organically. We welcome in wildlife. We're utilising the heat from the roof in ways that means we can grow things that you wouldn't normally be able to grow in a garden in Stockport. The whole process is very creative, and I couldn't ask for a better job, basically.
Every day there's this back and forward communication with Nick about what's going on up here and what we're trying to do at the restaurant. And it's a massive learning curve, you know, there's so much to learn. We're always learning off each other. He's like, oh right, I didn't realise you were doing that with it, well I'll try and harvest it this time.
So we've got tomatillos, Mexican type of tomato that's used in salsas and stuff like that. It's one of my favourite things to grow. It's prolific. It feels like it should be a tropical thing, but it does really well in the north.
It's really lovely harvesting as well, isn't it? You get that lovely like, sense of discovery of like turning them round and looking through the lanterns to see if they're ready. And...
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because a lot of people aren't used to them. So people come in and go, oh, what's that? And it's just a Mexican tomato, this.
So we've got lemon verbena here, which is a really lovely herb Nick's growing up here. We really like using it in the kitchen. It's very versatile. It smells like lemonade. It's one of my favourite herbs. It's always nice to just like play with things up here.
It's how we get some of our best ideas.
Yeah.
Works.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does actually. Here we have mashua, which is a type of South American tuber. They generally grow about this big, look a bit like a parsnip to be honest. What's interesting about the mashua is the top growth's edible as well. Very similar to nasturtium. It has that nasturtium pepperiness, but it has a real hit at the end of it. So for us, it's a double whammy. So we harvest the top growth throughout the year, and then we dig up the tubers before the first frosts and serve them on the menu as well. So adding a bit of Latin flavour to the car park in Stockport. Here we have an Italian summer squash called tromboncino. Tromboncino being Italian for trombone because it is trombone-esque. Something unusual that I like to grow. We've also been using the leaves and the stems. We cut the stems down to rigatoni size, and then it'll be typically fried in a bit of lemon thyme butter and served alongside the dish. And it's something a bit different to a regular courgette. So if we can grow something that's a little bit different, a little bit harder to get, that's generally what we aim for, if we can. We have 10 olas in total. It's a terracotta vase shape that's sunken into the soil. Because of the terracotta, it slowly releases water into the soil system. You can see the tomato plants have grown the roots around the ola. Keeps the bed nice and moist. Perfect growing conditions for the tomatoes and the cucumbers. Here we have yacon, which is a Incan vegetable. It's a tuber about the size of a yam. What's quite interesting about yacon is it's sweet, not savoury. The Incans used to make a syrup from it, use it in their desserts, and luckily we've had a lot of heat and this plant has just thrived. The Colombian guy over there says it's huacon, and I'm like, come on Lewis mate, I'm from Stockport, it's just yacon this.
I'd always thought about rooftop gardens as being a good idea. And I just contacted the council and said, look, you've got so many car parks and they're not full, let's take a bit of space. And they were really forthcoming, they gave us some space. So we came with Manchester Urban Diggers, and they're primarily involved in finding spaces for growing veg within the community. And we started to just build a few beds up here. There's so much space in England, there's so much space in Stockport, in Manchester, all over the country that you can just adopt and grow. You know, you can start with anything. All you need is a little soil and some seeds.
Good boy. Stay here. Never. I've grown courgettes for the best part of 50 years, and it had never crossed my mind that you could eat the stems. So I shall definitely try that next year. Now this is the spring garden, and as the name suggests, this is not its finest hour. It really does nothing between July and early February. But in February, March, April and May, it's a joy. And a lot of these plants that flower early in the year, before the canopy opens out, are growing. They're growing underground, their roots are really active. So the time to mulch spring flowering plants is now. In fact, you can mulch any part of the garden, that will do no harm at all. Now, the perfect mulch for spring flowering plants is leaf mould. And this is simply last year's leaves rotted down, and this is what they turn into. Trust me, it smells delightful. It smells of a wood on a sunny October afternoon. So I will spread this around the existing plants. As with all mulches, it will keep the weeds at bay, it will keep the moisture in, but also work into the soil and create that lovely loose root run that woodland plants like best. As with any mulch, it's far better to do a smaller area thickly than to spread it too thin. And I would say 2 inches, 5 centimetres. But you can also use garden compost. You can use any bought-in mulch material. Now, obviously, all this is in preparation for making the garden look as good as possible next year. But Nick has been to Newcastle to see a plant which is at its best right now.
Big, bold and beautiful, their sumptuous heads bobbing about in autumn, chrysanthemums have it all, especially at this time of year when their earthy colours sit so perfectly with the tones of autumn. They remind me of my mum, who used to grow them en masse in a polytunnel when I was a kid. And the scent still intoxicates me today. So to be surrounded by them is a real treat. Hall's of Heddon Nursery has been in the family for over 100 years, and there's nothing David Hall doesn't know about one of my favourite flowers. A great chance for me to revel in some chrysanthemum chat. These growing beds look spectacular. How many different varieties have you got growing here?
At the moment, it's about 135, 140 different varieties, 8,500 plants.
I think one of the unfortunate things about chrysanthemums is they get a bad rap, but actually as a garden plant they're extraordinarily useful, and I think they deserve a renaissance.
They're very valuable. There's not much will give you this degree of colour this late in the season.
Exactly, and as you say, the colour range is just extraordinary. I think one of the things about chrysanthemums is lots of people just get a little bit overwhelmed by the sort of sheer range of groups and types. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah, you could break it down into 4 basic groups. Standing here amongst some spray chrysanthemums, one of the easiest types for people new to chrysanthemums to grow. But then you've got also the bloom chrysanthemums, your single individual blooms at the top of a stem where you've got to work at them to get the best out of them. You've also got the Korean rubellums, the more hardier types that could be left in the garden, worked in amongst a herbaceous border. And then the charm chrysanthemums, which can be perfectly easily grown in pots to give you a late season. And with the right varieties, some of those look absolutely superb right through November into December.
How many things are coming into full bloom in October and November? Just about everything's done, isn't it? Yet these plants are still providing fabulous colour in your borders. We've come out into these beds, and I think these demonstrate some of the best of your spray chrysanthemums, the sort of good garden varieties. And this is a particular favourite of yours, right?
It is. It's a variety I remember as a young lad, a variety called Chatsworth. It's one of the earliest spray chrysanthemums.
I mean, it's fabulous colour. There's something really interesting about the fact that kind of bronzy orange brings out a certain blue note in the foliage. And I can just imagine this sat kind of front or mid-border, load of autumn shrubs and grasses nearby. I think people sort of forget these are just good herbaceous plants that can go into the garden. I have to say as well, just here, this is Southway Sheba, a lovely plant and also really useful. Having that kind of open flower means it's brilliant for pollinators as well. Now, in terms of keeping them happy and healthy, what's your ideal soil?
Well, main thing is a well-drained soil, and they definitely don't like sitting in wet soils. They'll struggle then. As much sun as possible. All of these beds will get a dressing of just fish blood and bone meal at the start of the season, just prior to planting.
So it's almost the same as growing dahlias in many ways, I guess.
To a degree, yeah, except they're a bit more frost tolerant than dahlias, tubers would be.
David, we've come under cover to look at these bloom chrysanthemums. The protection overhead means that you can sort of get perfect blooms for cutting. And to do that, you use a technique just to focus all the energy on a single bloom with disbudding.
Well, we'd be taking a shoot like that when the bud's about that size, and then actually working down through, taking all the little side shoots out of it all the way down to a point where you can, then all the energy's into there. If we weren't to do that, what you end up is getting something like this one. The flowers, individual flowers will be crowding each other out. So disbudding, all the energy's gone into the one bloom, so you get much better form and a much bigger flower.
When it comes to choosing hardy chrysanthemums for the border, there are two types which I always recommend, the Koreans and the rubellums. Now this is a particular favourite of mine, I have to say. It's called Mary Stoker, and I think it just embodies the season. It's got that sort of beautiful autumnal peachy tone, and then it sort of fades into yellow in the centre. And I think that colour just associates so well with some of the other kind of autumn tones, the darker oranges and burgundies. Just looks perfect. This is Nell Gwyn, and it's one of the Korean forms. A bit like Mary Stoker, which is one of the rubellum forms, you can buy both of them in 2 or 3 litre containers in the garden centre, so you've got an instant bulky plant. So many of these Korean and rubellum types tend to be in those typical kind of autumn tones, oranges and burgundies, but using Nell Gwyn, it's got this sort of antique pink note to it, plus the yellow centre, plus that ring of sort of near white or yellow. And so I think this colour and this form really helps extend the idea of summer all the way into autumn. And something really special about this plant as well is all of the different stages of flowering. So you start out with these tight green buds, then move on to partially open with just a little bit of pink showing. Then you see the yellow backs of the petals, and then finally it becomes full blown. And you just end up with this gorgeous effect across the whole plant. This is one of the charm chrysanthemums, and this particular cultivar is called Bravo. Just look at the colour of this. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And these are the kind of chrysanthemums that you'll find available in garden centres from late summer into early autumn. They're incredibly compact, and they can stay in the ground year round, so they stay really, really short. And the way I like to use them is in association with other perennials just started to fade in autumn time, so you get those yellows and oranges with this at the front, mixing up those autumn colours. I think it's absolutely perfect. For years, dahlias were in the doldrums, but they managed to make a comeback. And I think with all the qualities of chrysanthemums, it's about time they made a triumphant return to our gardens.
Well, Nick's right. It's amazing how unpopular dahlias were 20 years ago. So maybe this is the time when chrysanthemums will re-enter all our gardens. Now, my guess is that not many of you grow this fruit here. This is a medlar. And the fruit is very distinctive. It's a member of the rose family. The fruits look a bit like rose hips. And they taste very distinctive. They've got a slightly sort of gamey taste, I think that's the best way to describe it. And they're rock hard, as they are now, and will stay hard on the tree. And you pick them at the latest possible moment before they fall off and before the frosts come. So sort of in the next week or two. And then store them, and they blet. And what bletting means is they soften but don't actually rot. And the Victorians used to eat them like a boiled egg. They would put a spoon in and spoon them out and eat them with cheese and maybe a glass of port after a meal, and they love them. Now, they've fallen out of fashion as far as food goes, but they look fantastic and try making medlar jelly. That is absolutely delicious. Now, it's time to go back to Hever Castle in Kent and rejoin Adam as he explores the design features of the garden.
When William Adolph Astor created the gardens at Hever Castle, he went big. Along with the 38-acre lake, there's pleasure grounds to walk in, a rose garden, a blue corner, and, of course, the enormous Italian garden. This place does feel a little surreal. I think Astor lived in Rome for a while. We travelled Italy, and every time he saw maybe a beautiful garden, a piece of architecture, he was in a position where he could think, well, when I get home, I'm going to create a bit of that. Why? Well, because I think it looks beautiful, and I can. At the famous Villa d'Este garden in Tivoli, there's a garden of 100 fountains. Astor loved the world of tiny jets so much, he made his own at Hever. The scale of this is absolutely incredible, but there's a sense of theatre. And interestingly, as you come back and you look, they're like individual pieces of art, and there's 17 of them, and then you go closer and you pay a bit more attention, and each gargoyle is different. And about the planting as well, because it's green, it's all about shape, form, texture, and that makes it feel just beautifully calm. And yeah, here it's vast. Think about it. In an individual garden, that makes an incredible feature. The head gardener in charge of all this and all of Hever's gardens is Neil Miller. Neil, that wall has been there for over 100 years. Has it changed much in that time?
In an answer, Adam, no, not at all. We've just been sort of custodians here, just looking after the creation and the design that Astor laid down all those years ago.
Yeah, because there's a wonderful simplicity about the planting.
There is. The green hues, the colours,
Yeah.
the leaf texture, you really got to stand and look at it close up.
You're right, there's a sort of certain atmosphere to it, isn't
Yeah.
it? And on top of that, you've got the sound of water trickling along. And I think, how's that set up? How does it work?
Again, it's all recycled. 120 years ago, Astor had all the water features designed here, and all the water is pumped from our own lake. And it comes on some hoses and pipes all the way around the estate, so it feeds all the water features, then empties into the lake and comes round again. And you're thinking, that was done 120 years ago. We can learn something from that now.
So how do you maintain it?
We kind of put the hostas, the astelbes, the ferns to bed during the winter, and Mother Nature in the spring wakes everything up, and there we go again. So, really good.
You've made that sound really simple, mate. I'm sure there's
It's not really, but it's not. It could be worse.
But yeah, it's, you know, it's incredible. Neil definitely isn't just a custodian of this enormous garden. Running along the other side of the Italian wall garden is a brand new border. 200 metres long. Neil and his team have crafted it beautifully and connected it to the wider landscape. Have a look across the other side of that lake. You can see a big clump of bulrush. Well, I think that's where this garden starts. Boom. And then the grass is here. And then these start to create a rhythm, and they just keep moving through the space. So if you look at the colour, that flower of the panicum, that then gets picked up in the miscanthus, and then that goes over to the eupatorium. But here, the verbena bounces, boom, and it arrives over there. And what I like about this garden is you're not just walking along one side of it. And I think when we come to places like this, it's sometimes hard to take home ideas because you think everything's so big, how can I do it? But this shows you this tiny little pathway cutting up through means it's really immersive. And I know if it was pouring with rain, we'd be soaking wet, but It's great. It sounds different. It looks different because there's steps and layers. It doesn't have to be big and wide. It could just be a little pathway through some planting at home, and all of a sudden you're in it and you're enjoying it, which for me is what gardening's all about. I think Neil and his team are doing a fantastic job at maintaining this garden and its history. But what I love is the fact that they're not fearful about moving it forward. Why does it work? It works because of scale. It's been big and bold, so it sits comfortably with everything else. Fair play to him. For me, as a man who loves landscaping, the level of craftsmanship at Hever is immense. And it's found in surprising places. That central space is so strong and so formal, and then you've got these little rooms. This is a rock garden, and it feels safe, it feels intimate. But the rock work is that good, it just feels like it's been exposed. It's an old quarry. Look at the stratas. But in reality, that's all handcrafted. Human beings have built that. Look at the planting, straight away, the wooded stuff, those things like the trees and the shrubs, the cotoneasters, the hydrangeas, the acers. They've been clipped and shaped, and they take the forms of the rock, which means the whole thing feels really strong. And when you start to look at the softer planting, things like the ferns, well, that's used out there, so that gives you that visual connection that carries you through. The uprights of the irises and the ferns work well against the strata of the stone. And it definitely lives up to its name of Blue Corner. So that blue doesn't just provide the colour, there's a softness. But you could lose a serious amount of time in this garden just enjoying the shapes and the forms. The whole thing just feels like it's been sort of sculpted. I could happily stay here, soaking up the rest of the garden, but I've got an appointment at the lake.
Have you had a good day?
The scale of this place is incredible, and you know, I've been lucky enough to go to Rome a few times. When I'm there, it's always you walk around a corner and there's a surprise, and you get exactly that from here.
It's amazing, isn't it? But what's not to like about a garden created by a man who loved history and gardening and had the money to do it?
Yeah, he really just followed his dreams, didn't
Absolutely,
he? Yeah.
absolutely.
Mind you, it's left me fancying a pizza.
Why not? Let's go.
The years go by so quickly. I realised that the last time I was at Hever, which I thought wasn't so long ago, they hadn't even begun that new garden, and I'd love to see it. So that's a good reason to go back. Now it's raining outside and we're entering the wet season, and some plants really do not like the wet, and pelargoniums are amongst them. They're still flowering, but if they get sodden, that will do as much damage as if they get frosted. So even if we don't get any frost for a little while, it is worth bringing them in and keeping them dry. Now I bring them in here, which is ideal, but it'd be just as good on a windowsill, indoors, but just resist the temptation to water them, because these can be bone dry at least till Christmas. And also there's no need to cut them back too hard. The time to do a hard prune is in spring, just as you start to see new growth. Well, it is a busy time of year and there is a lot to do, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not important, as it always is throughout the year, to stop and allow enough time just to relish the best of the season, and particularly all the fruits. And I don't just mean the apples and the pears, but also fruits like rose hips, some of which are better than the flowers. And also berries, like obviously hawthorn, but also weird ones like calicarpa, which look almost metallic. These tiny little sort of purple ball bearings bunched together on the stems. And then, of course, great masses of pyracantha and cotoneaster. And as well as being great for us to enjoy at this time of year, they're brilliant for wildlife. The birds love them. Now, you may have heard that Nellie died last week. She'd been very ill, and that's why you saw less and less of her with me in the garden. But she died peacefully, surrounded by those that loved her most, and she's buried in the garden, wrapped in my coat, with flowers and tennis balls and her favourite biscuits. And although we miss her a lot and we're very sad, we did have 8 wonderful years to share her with our lives and this garden. But life goes on, and Ned and I will be here next Friday at 8 o'clock for our final programme in this series. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.